Ladies and gentlemen, we've been just giving y'all the gems all month. Just all month. It's Black History Month. We trying to look out for our people. So, we bring in the experts because we have no education. Let's be very real.
Yeah.
No, post-secondary?
Half post-secondary.
See?
Partial
Quarter.
post-secondary.
Quarter.
Partial.
Not good. But we do have a young man here who has definitely had his time in post-secondary. He's still in there.
Yeah.
Actually. He's
Still
an
putting in
adjunct
work.
professor at U of T. We have Mr. Winston Husbands. Make some noise.
Mr. Winston Husbands.
In the building.
Yes, sir.
Now, there are disparaging numbers when it comes to the Black community and HIV. Why is that?
Out the gate.
Well, it's a complex issue on one level. On another level, it's a very straightforward issue. Across the board, across the board. If you look at income, if you look at who's incarcerated, if you look at who doesn't have enough food to eat, all of these things affect Black people in a very, very specific kind of way.
Yeah.
And we're usually, if you rank different communities in terms of, access to food and all of these things, income and all these things, we're usually sort of what you call the conventional measures of well-being or how well people are doing. We're usually coming up close to the bottom. And so what we find with HIV is no surprise. So what that means specifically for HIV is that in Ontario, almost 30%, a little less than 30% of new diagnoses in 2022 were among Black people. But Black people make up only about 6% of Ontario's population.
Wow.
So that tells you something. across for the country as a whole, for Canada as a whole, where these data exist, it's close to 20%, even though Black people are only 5% of the country's population.
Wow.
So that tells you something.
That tells you a lot.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
In the Black community, there is a thing about not using protection. It's like a big thing. And it's almost like you get brownie points for not doing so. How do we break that stigma? Because I feel like that's kind of a starting point.
I also feel that's across the board, though. Nobody wants to.
Yeah, yes and no.
Well, he's correct.
Yeah.
It's not what you call using protection is not sort of, the thing that sort of that normally brings people to sexual activity.
Yeah.
It is something that people do because they feel a reason to do it. It
Exactly.
is not, okay, So I think that Black people are no different from anybody else in regard to their reluctance to, as you call it, use protection. But I don't think that that's the whole story. So we know that Black people are just as sensible as everybody else, just as knowledgeable about everybody else about HIV. There are lots of people in Canada, in this city, in Toronto, who don't know how HIV is transmitted.
Yeah.
But I don't think Black people as a group are overrepresented among people who don't know. So we do know how to look after ourselves. We do know what we need to do to maintain good health, whether it's HIV or anything else.
Yeah.
So the issue isn't necessarily a lack of knowledge. It is a lack of the proper kinds of policies to meet people halfway, at least, so that people will make the kinds of choices we expect them to make.
And what are some of those policies?
Well, this is where we get into health and wellness policies to do with health and wellness. So, for example, every year, all levels of government spend a lot of money on HIV programs, HIV services. Those things are governed by some kind of policy that decision makers have about, this is what we need to do, this is what we should do, and then they find a way to do those things.
Yeah.
But let me give you an example. Last year, the federal government published a new action plan on HIV and sexually transmitted and bloodborne infections in Canada. So this is the federal government's plan to address HIV and other sexually transmitted and bloodborne infections in Canada. in that document, you'd be hard pressed to find any mention, any specific mention of Black people, even though some of us have pointed out to the people who were writing that document. And in fact, they know. We didn't even have to point it out to them because they know. They're the ones who have all this information. They know that, Black people are disproportionately affected by HIV. We have a disproportionate burden of Canada's HIV epidemic. Yet, if you look at the federal government's action plan, you would hardly find anything in there to do with Black people. Nothing specific to say, you know what, this is a problem. Here's what everybody needs to do to address this, to sort of bring Black people on side and to address this issue among nothing.
Because they don't see it as a problem.
Well, the thing is, a number of us, we organized a consultation with the people who were writing the plan before the plan was written.
Oh.
And we sat down, by Zoom, of course, and we had a discussion and we said things and put things on the table. The draft plan came out. There was almost nothing in it specific to Black people.
When you were speaking to them in that meeting, was there a sense of like, oh yeah, we definitely need to include this. Oh, thank you for letting us.
Well, there was a sense of this is important information, but then where does it go? Where does it land?
Yeah.
So the draft plan came out and there was nothing there. And then we got back to them again and said, you know what? We talked, we had these conversations. You've written the draft plan. In fact, we even wrote a response to the draft plan to say that this is, I don't know what this means for Black people.
Yeah.
And the final plan came out and it was almost the same thing. Wow. It is like we never had it. It was like we never.
Faces.
It was like we never had that conversation. So that is the kind of thing that we're up against.
And there's no follow-up meeting after that for some.
Well,
sort
that's
of
the thing.
accountability?
We've been trying to do that. We've been trying to do that, but there has been no response from the other side so far. The last time we met was probably 4 months ago, and whenever you check, it's okay. Just hold on. Wait a little longer. But so, in effect, there has been. Meanwhile, the plan has been launched, as far as I know, because it is published. It is out there in the public domain.
Yeah.
So that means that these things are going ahead without the benefit of recognizing the magnitude of the issue among Black people, and without the kind of policy, the kind of effort, the kind of spending that needs to happen to say, you know what, here's how we're going to address this crisis among Black people in Canada.
And where would you want it to be spent in terms of highlighting these issues?
Well, I mean, part of it is, there's always a place for education and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But a lot of it has to do with, first of all, encouraging people to get tested. And then once people are tested, making sure that people have access to the kind of treatments that are available, so that at the end of the day, they would reach a stage. If people are living with HIV, if people test positive, at the end of the day, they will reach a stage where, because of these very good treatments that are available, they will reach a stage where they no longer can transmit the virus to somebody else, to a sexual partner.
Because that's the whole point.
That's the whole point.
Undetectable.
Stop the spread. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And those therapies exist. It is, how do you get them in the hands of the people who need them?
We need some incentives.
The other thing is that, there are lots of reasons why people might drop out of treatment. So once you get tested and you get on treatment, you have to have a doctor. That's the first thing, because, somebody needs to check you every whatever and write you the prescriptions that you need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to have a doctor, which we know can be problematic.
It's already a problem.
Okay.
Yeah, for men.
But
People were up 3 hours for a new family doctor that opened up in Whitby. In the
3
snowstorm.
hours.
In the snowstorm, we're standing for 3 hours waiting for a doctor.
Is there a shortage?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but even if you have a doctor, maintaining your drug regimen, sticking to your medications and all that, you have to do this. You have to stick to it. There's no opting out.
Yeah.
And that's a major effort. So people need some access to some kind of resources to keep that going. because, you know, as happened during COVID, for example, you can tell people, well, you know, if you get sick or if you don't feel so good, you should stay home.
Yeah.
But if people are staying home and they live with a lot of other people, you know, a lot of big family in a
Yeah.
small place, that
getting
might not
sick.
exactly that might not be very helpful. And
Yeah.
then people can't get a sick day off work. So telling them if you get sick, you stay home.
Yep.
So what I'm saying is that there are a lot of different reasons why people might not be able to adhere to their regimens over an extended period of time. So there needs to be some kind of supports to enable people to do that.
We need some incentives,
because
man.
the payoff is a really good one.
Yeah.
It's a really big one.
Yeah.
So some incentives, some supports to help people maintain that until they reach a stage where, you know, they wouldn't be able to transmit the virus to
We
somebody
need some
else.
coupons off groceries
No.
or a credit score or something.
Or discipline. And
Discipline. That's not an
and-
incentive.
and be safe.
That's even more reason for me not to go get tested.
Yeah.
No, but I feel like if people had incentive to go get tested,
Yeah.
then that would help erase the stigma, because I feel like also people have a wrong, I guess, idea of what it means to get tested and what's involved in the testing and all that.
Yeah.
Like, I know a lot of people who are afraid of needles that just automatically assume I'm gonna get jabbed
wanna
up,
deal with the
and
blood
I don't want
work
to deal with
and da,
that.
da, da.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. So I know that if there was some incentive, a lot of people would just get over it and be like, all right, let's get this done.
Yeah.
A
A lot of people are just being lazy.
But
man.
you know, it's difficult to for any kind of managing your health in any serious way. I mean, it's difficult to do it if you don't have, you know, if your food situation is not good,
Yeah.
if your housing situation is not good, you know, if you can't get a babysitter for your kids when you have to go to appointments or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of
There's so
things
many
that get in
obstacles.
people's way. People already know what they need to do
Yeah,
to manage their health,
absolutely.
but it's those other things that get in the way, and that is why I think people really need some help. There's something called integrated case management, where instead of saying, normally, you know, you'd say, okay, we have this clinic here, now you can go there. But you know that people can't go to the clinic because of all these
yeah.
other things, right? Instead of just putting the clinic there and saying, okay, clinic there, you go. You say, okay, how can I make it possible or make it easier for you to actually go to the clinic and engage with, you know, the services that are available there?
Yeah.
That's the important question.
Yeah. How close are we to a possible cure or vaccine?
Well,
And are we close at all?
there's no cure, there's no vaccine on the horizon. However,
Magic Johnson.
there are drugs available now,
Yeah.
which, as I said, they can, you know, if you stick with the regime and stick with your doctor and take your drugs and so on and so forth over a period of time, you will reach a stage where you will not be transmitting the virus to somebody else.
Yeah.
So these are very good drugs that are available. They're not a cure because
Yeah.
even though you're not transmitting the virus, you're still HIV positive.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you fall off the wagon, you know, that there
can-
could be consequences
Yeah.
for that. But that's the best we have right now. But
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing, you know, that is imminent like next year or the year after. But however, because of these drugs, you know, there's a push, an international push, that HIV transmission might cease to be the kind of major public health issue that it has been for the last 40 years
Oh, wow.
by 2032.
Oh, wow.
That was the original idea. But then COVID came along and disrupted a lot of things all over the world.
Oh,
so
wow.
it's probably not something that's going to happen by 2032, but it's going to come nevertheless.
To a point,
but
yeah.
it won't. But what we have to do is to make sure that as much as possible, it comes for everybody. Not for some kinds of communities or some places and not others.
Yeah.
That is the thing. Because in Canada, if it doesn't come for Black people, you know what will happen? At the end of the day, the decision makers will say, we beat HIV. We're done. Except that Black people will be left
Yeah.
struggling
Yeah.
with this. But
Yeah.
then the resources would have moved elsewhere to deal with some other issue,
Mhm.
and then we'd really be in
Be in
trouble.
trouble. Yeah,
Right.
definitely. And I feel like in terms of just like people going to get tested, like you were saying, like just the world is a lot right now. And some people just don't want another thing on their plate. Like
Yeah.
a lot of people,
Everyone's
they're
fighting
not-
a cause
yeah,
of
and,
their own.
and everyone's done things and had, they lived a life and they're afraid of what possibly could have come from that. So they don't want to know the answer. They don't want to add another thing onto their plate. And I think that if we alleviate, especially just some of the other things that are going on, when we're talking about the grocery prices and property tax raising and insurance rates, it's like if we alleviate even just like the unemployment rate, if we alleviate some of these things, it'll be easier as well for people to feel like they can go and get tested because they don't want to add another thing to their plate right now.
Yeah.
I just, in terms of, I know for that research you said in 2022, they're saying 55% of being Black men.
I'm not up to date with that figure. What
Mhm.
proportion are Black men? But I can tell you that among women who are diagnosed with HIV, of course, the number of diagnoses among women is less than among men.
Yeah.
But in Ontario and for Canada as a whole, in Ontario, Black women make up 40-something% of all the people diagnosed, the new diagnoses in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And that tells Black women, you make up 40-something%.
That's good.
When you know
yeah.
that Black people as a whole are only like 6% of the how did we get there? That is where our advocacy comes in, to say this is abnormal.
Yeah.
Nobody should be happy with, whether you're Black or not. Nobody should be happy with this.
Almost
So
feels like
let
an
us
attack.
put our heads together and address this problem. But there's always this reluctance that I think that that's part of the racism that we experience. This reluctance that even when you come as a quote unquote expert and you say, well, I know something about this issue and I have some ideas on how we can address this issue, the decision makers are reluctant to talk to you. They may not know anything about the problem or more than you.
Yeah.
But they know that they can get away with not talking to you. There's no punishment. There's no nothing. People can just go on with their business as though you weren't there, basically. And that is the kind of thing that we're fighting against.
Yeah, they're obviously addressing other communities and helping, like, for instance, the LGBTQ community has a lot of resources and information and marketing to help them be up to date with all the issues.
Well,
how do we get the same?
Yeah, it is
How
not
do you-
even the LGBTQ community, generally speaking, because they're Black LGBTQ
Right.
people as well.
Exactly.
But when you look at most diagnoses in Ontario and in Canada would be among gay and bisexual men and other men who have sex with men. But when you break it down according to race, you would see that Black gay and bisexual men account for like 17 or 18%
Wow.
of the new diagnoses among gay men.
Wow.
And that,
That's a wild number.
that's-
of course, it's a wild number. So it is not as though the whole gay population
Yeah.
of gay men is benefiting from this, because Black gay men have not benefited from it.
What are
generally
some of the
speaking.
barriers they're facing to get to that information or treatments?
Well, the general barrier that we face is still anti-Black racism.
Yeah.
That's the sort of
Overarching.
overarching thing.
Yeah.
Because what that means is that Black people do not get access to the things that people call the social determinants of health, like jobs and income and housing and being able to feed yourself and your family and so on and so forth. The things that normally we don't think of those things as having a lot to do with health, but they do, because if you don't have, if you're struggling to find housing, you can't really. It
Affects your mental health as well.
exactly, and your physical health.
Yeah.
It makes it difficult to make the kinds of decisions that you need to make. So So, this overarching thing about anti-Black racism means that we're not having access to these things that are called the social determinants that are going to help us to make the kind of decisions about our health that we know we can make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow. I'm depressed.
Don't be depressed, because there's a lot of work going on.
Yes, let's talk about the good.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of work going on there. Some of us, for example, I'm part of a group. It has a kind of a name that's a mouthful, kind of unwieldy. It's called the Interim Committee on HIV Affecting Black Canadian Communities. We publish something called the Black HIV Manifesto. So sometimes we call ourselves, just for short, the Manifesto Group. That's easier than
He knows what that's like.
That's easier than the long one, right? Yeah. And so we've been doing a lot of advocacy, about this issue, and we're not the only one. There are other people who are doing this too. But and there are about 9 of us in this group, and we're going hard with advocacy, telling the story, and engaging decision makers in HIV and health to bring our perspective. One of the things that we often say is that we're not going to, you, the decision makers, there's no way that you can sort of solve this problem for us. The problem is our problem. So we have to be part of the solution, which means that you have to have us playing a leadership role in making decisions about Black people's health. You can't just go off and, come up with something.
In everything, huh?
You can't
It's
just go
so
off
crazy.
and come up with something, because you don't know.
Sounds like the music industry.
Yeah, you don't know. We know.
Sounds like the music
So
industry.
we have to be playing a leadership role in making the kind of decisions that need to be made. And that's a fundamental thing that we're pushing.
Interesting. Wow. Well, I've learned a lot today.
I'll give you a concrete example. So, for Canada as a whole, well, and in Ontario, how do we know that in 2022, Black people were so many % of new diagnoses? Because there's this thing called surveillance. Now, one of the things we're saying is that surveillance is supposed to be a technical term that epidemiologists use. And we're also saying that in this day and age, that term is not appropriate. You can't go around talking about surveillance.
Surveilling Black people is crazy.
They're surveilling everybody, but hey, we
Can't say it.
That's not a term that you can. Yeah, and so that's one of our issues too. But in Canada, some provinces don't collect these data about Black people. Some provinces collect the data, but they don't share it with the federal government, and so that we never know. We need these data to say, okay, how are we doing? How's this thing going? Are we making progress? Are we making progress or not? And what's happening from year to year? And those are the And we are saying, you know what? A better job has to be done in collecting these data and share it. So we need a role in that. It's not just your job. We need a role at the table to talk about how these data will be collected. Not only that, how they will be shared and how they will be interpreted, and how we will make it possible for Black people who are doing this work on the ground to be able to have these data and to be able to understand, to interpret them in a way that suits them to inform the work that they're doing. Otherwise, it's a missed opportunity. So we started this project with the Public Health Agency of Canada precisely around those issues.
Are there any politicians within Ontario or Canada that have a hand in those issues that we should look towards
or be supporting?
Well,
within the next voting?
I don't know if politicians have a hand in them directly, but politicians determine the direction of, what the Ministry of Health does, and what the Public Health Agency of Canada does. So in that sense, politicians are part of the decision-making structure, even though they might not necessarily have a direct hand in, whether to do A or B about HIV in Canada.
And that would be on a federal or I
Both,
guess both,
both,
federal and provincial.
and even municipal, even within the Toronto Public Health. Yeah.
Okay. And where is a place that people can go to find more information for like difficult questions that they may have?
So if you need information like how is HIV transmitted, what is an HIV test, and all those kind of things, there's an organization called Katie. It's a national organization, but it is located in Toronto. It has a website called Katie, C-A-T-I-A, Katie.catie, Katie.ca.
Mm-hmm.
And on that, there's all kind of information there. But if you are now sort of getting into this, there's something I think is called the essentials or the basics or something, which is a part of the website that answers those questions.
Yeah.
What is HIV? How do you get it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then you can go on to, bigger questions, and all that information is there. So that's one place where information is available.
Mm-hmm.
But information is available also through the Public Health Agency of Canada. It's also available through the Ministry of Health in Ontario.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are many sources for the information.
NoHIV.ca as well. I believe that KNOW HIV.ca.
Yes.
One.
That's a new campaign that has started. No
Yeah,
HIV. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us all this information.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. We just trying to, especially this month, really tap in with a lot of Black experts in different facets. We've had someone here for finance, we've had someone here for politics, and now yourself. And thank you so much for taking the time. You came all the way from Guelph. Come on. Come on.
In this weather. Come on now.